I saw his State of the Union address, a propaganda initiative designed to prepare the American people psychologically for combat.
Right now, the U.S. and our allies are closer to potential for war than at any time. That's not saying that a military strike is imminent.
Just at the moment when a president's strategy appears to be getting a little bit of traction, I think it would be exactly the wrong time.
The comments on North Korean human rights were commendable in pointing out an issue that often is put on the back burner.
This Olympics period, could this develop into something meaningful?
And I think we need to seize this opportunity to get U.S.-North Korea talks started.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jang Cho. President Donald Trump delivered his first State of the Union address this week, and North Korea was at the center of his foreign policy concerns. President Trump called North Korea a depraved and cruel dictatorship and promised to exert maximum pressure to prevent Pyongyang from threatening the U.S. with nuclear weapons.
North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear missiles could very soon threaten our homeland. Past experience has taught us that complacency and concessions only invite aggression and provocation. No regime has oppressed its own citizens more totally or brutally than the cruel dictatorship in North Korea.
Now, my guest today, Mr. Frank Jannuzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation. He was a former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Also joining me today, Mr. Bruce Klingner, senior fellow at the Heritizji Foundation. He spent 20 years in the intelligence community. Welcome to both of you.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning. Bruce, let me begin with you. What was the key message on North Korea in the president's State of the Union address?
Well, prior to the speech, there had been some media reports that he would be making eye-opening remarks about North Korea and that his remarks would be driving the headlines on Wednesday. So many of us were concerned there'd be something about a preventive attack, which is an issue of great focus and concern in Washington. But instead it was, I thought fairly straightforward. The comments on North Korean human rights I thought were commendable in pointing out an issue that often is put on the back burner as we all focus on the nuclear and missile threat. In many ways, I thought it was reminiscent of his speech before the National Assembly in South Korea during his trip. The comments about Otto Warmbier and having his parents there were really gut-wrenching. Whether it was remarks justifying a future attack or not, I might think that's reading a little too much into the tea leaves, but it didn't provide any policy ideas of, when he mentioned maximum pressure, he didn't mention an engagement, which is the other half of the policy.
Was it simply a call to improve North Korean human rights, do you think?
I think it perhaps had a number of different objectives, and some we may not be quite sure what they were. I think clearly it's pointing out the depravity of the North Korean system, a purveyor of crimes against humanity, as the UN Commission of Inquiry concluded. It certainly pointed out how it is a threat, the nuclear and missile threat becoming closer to being able to target the American homeland. There are disputes amongst experts as to how close they are. The CIA director has said it could be within a handful of months. Other experts think it may still be a bit down the road, but in a way we're splitting hairs. We know the threat is getting very, very close.
Frank, how did you see his address?
I had a very different take on it than Bruce. I saw the president rolling out these two very sympathetic victims of North Korean human rights abuses, essentially as props. He used them as what I believe is a campaign that he has begun to desensitize the American people to the humanity of the North Korean people and the North Korean state. This is, I think, a dangerous step by the president to essentially begin a demonization of North Korea to prepare the nation psychologically for the very real possibility of a military attack on North Korea. If the president really cared about the human rights of the North Korean people, he would appoint an ambassador for human rights in North Korea, a position that he has left vacant. If he really cared deeply about the human rights situation in the North Koreans, he might open our borders to North Korean refugees, something that he has done the opposite of. We've seen a huge drop-off from an average of 20 a year North Korean refugees coming to the United States under Obama to just 2 in the United States last year under President Trump. So while I don't doubt for a second that the president has some empathy for the suffering of the North Korean people, I saw his State of the Union address as the opening salvo of a propaganda initiative designed to prepare the American people psychologically for combat with a demonic, cruel, despotic dictatorship. These are words that leaders use when they're trying to prepare the nation psychologically for war.
Mm-hmm. Bruce, what are your thoughts on Frank's comments?
Well, I may not agree on the interpretation of the speech, but I think sort of the underlying issues certainly are there. Human rights in North Korea are awful, really unmatched in the world, and as the Commission of Inquiry concluded, really unseen on the globe since the end of the Nazi regime. And too often the human rights situation is subsumed by the military threat, either to ourselves or to our allies. And the president, I think, has been criticized for not raising human rights sufficiently. So I think it was good to bring out the character of the North Korean regime. Obviously, I would have liked the entire speech to be about North Korea, explaining precisely what the policy is, but he has a lot of ground to cover. Certainly the growing nuclear and missile threat to the United States is of great concern. It's driving some to advocate for a preventive attack, even if we don't feel an imminent threat from North Korea in the sense of indications of missiles on a launch stand. And that's the issue that we really need to be concerned about. A lot of Korea watchers in Washington have been increasingly concerned, even nervous, in the last several months about what we feel are suggestions or indications that this administration is considering that as an option.
Mm-hmm. Speaking about military attacks and preventive strikes on North Korea, last weekend the administration withdrew the consideration of Mr. Victor Cha as the U.S. ambassador to South Korea, and news media reports say that Mr. Cha expressed concerns over a limited strike on North Korea. What is telling about this decision, Bruce?
Well, we don't know the reasons for the derailment of Mr. Cha's nomination, but again, I think the important issue is on preventive attack. So that has been the issue that really, as we say, has sucked the air out of the room the last year. The U.S. has always had the options of a retaliatory strike or a preemptive strike, whether it's with the Soviet Union, Russia, China, whoever, so that either if someone has attacked us or we have good intelligence that someone is about to attack us, particularly with nuclear weapons. This new idea of preventive attack is something new that's been layered on top of the usual U.S. strategy. And it would be a case where we would do a military attack of whatever size in order to prevent North Korea from completing an ICBM development. The fact that so many Korea watchers who have access to people inside government are concerned about it, I think shows that there is reason for discussing the issue and reason for concern. So, as the Senate recently had hearings where they had 3 stellar witnesses who were arguing against that option, I think both at the congressional level and the media level, we need to have greater discussion about what would the objectives be for such an attack, what would the catalyst be for such an attack, and as many of us have written, the ramifications, the dangerous ramifications of such an option.
Well, again, I agree with Bruce on this point. Analysts who have studied the Korean Peninsula, whether they be Republicans or Democrats, conservative or liberal, in uniform or out of uniform, they are unanimous or nearly unanimous in their view that an attack on North Korea would carry grave risks for the United States and for the people on the peninsula. And they've also made clear, and I believe very strongly, that any military action against North Korea should always be a last resort. And the irony here is that the president's strategy of maximum pressure and engagement actually appears to be bearing some fruit. The North Koreans are coming to the Olympics and reaching out to the South, I believe in part because they're beginning to feel a little bit of pressure as a result of the concerted international sanctions against them. And they would like to see some of that pressure lifted. So just at the moment when our president's strategy appears to be getting a little bit of traction, I think it would be exactly the wrong time to abandon that strategy in favor of a risky attack, an attack predicated on the idea that North Korea cannot somehow be deterred once they possess an ICBM, that somehow they will be the one nation in the world that is immune to principles of nuclear deterrence. I think that's not a credible notion.
Bruce, within the Trump administration, is there a division between NSC and top officials like Secretaries Mattis and Tillerson on how seriously we should prepare and consider a military strike against North Korea?
Well, I think on this issue, as well as other issues related to North Korean policy, we've seen a number of conflicting, contradictory statements. Some would see it as a good cop, bad cop, but I think it's a bit more disjointed than that. Certainly, even just from the public statements, we've seen, strong discussion of the need for pressure, some dismissal of engagement or diplomacy as an option. It'd be a waste of time, and then discussions about that a North Korean ability to be able to hit the United States, just the mere ability, is intolerable and would be perhaps cause for a military action. So I think there's been a bit of confusion as to what the parameters of the policy are, what the catalyst for action would be, or perhaps what the sequence of whether a military option is not imminent, but is more likely down the road a bit.
Before we go, last question to both of you. This State of the Union address and this withdrawal of consideration of Victor Cha, are these grounds for us to believe that the Trump administration is closer to military strike against North Korea?
I think overall, right now, the U.S. and our allies are closer to the potential for war or military hostilities on the Korean Peninsula than at any time since 1994. That's not saying that a military strike is imminent or that it is certain. But it is an option that is on the table, and it wasn't on the table before.
I agree on that point, and I would say that the next few months are critical. We have an Olympic peace period that will extend through the month of March. And I think we need to seize this opportunity to get U.S.-North Korea talks started on the tough security issues that divide those two countries. There's an opportunity here to make progress on diplomacy, and starting with small steps, rather than trying to swing for the fences. Baseball's popular in Korea. We should play some small ball, singles, bunts, stolen bases, to make some minor progress on the tough security issues. I think that could lend some momentum to the diplomacy and help us avoid what could be a catastrophic escalation of hostility on the peninsula.
We'll have to wrap our first discussion here and move on to our second discussion.
This is an opportunity for engagement and a peaceful engagement around the Olympic Games, and I think we just need to make the best of it.
North Korean athletes arrived in South Korea for the Pyeongchang Winter Olympics, set to kick off in a week. At the same time, North Korea is busy preparing for its military parade, rescheduled to be held just a day before the opening of the Games. Now, Frank, let me begin with you. North Korea moved the date from April to just before the Pyeongchang Olympics. What is the message here?
Well, the February date and the April dates are both important dates in the history of the Korean People's Army. I think North Koreans love parades. I think North Korean leaders love military parades, as well as seeing the tractors go by, too. The message I take away from this is one of North Korean pride, but also one, a little bit, if I may, of North Korean insecurity. South Korea is about to host the world at a peaceful celebration of athletic competition, and all eyes are going to be on South Korea. And the South Korean people are going to get to display their modern, successful democracy to that world. So I think this parade is sort of like a consolation prize for the North Korean people. Kim Jong-un wants to rally his own people and say, look, we have something to be proud of too. In a way, it's a little bit sad because compared to the Parade of Nations at the Olympics, a parade of missiles in Pyongyang is going to look rather puny.
Bruce, there have been concerns that Pyongyang may be aiming to drive a wedge between Seoul and Washington during the Olympics. Do you think that has been the case so far?
Well, I think certainly that's their objective. It's been their objective for 70 years, but the U.S. and South Korea can work to prevent a wedge from occurring. And talking with U.S. and South Korean officials, they're sort of like, yeah, we know that's what they're trying, and it's not going to happen. So with the parade, I think the conjunction of the parade on the 8th and the opening of the Olympics on the 9th, in a way, are a way for North Korea to display both halves of its Byungjin policy. On February 8th, if, as we expect, that they will parade ICBMs and other significant missiles, then it would be a way of, we are a nuclear nation, have no doubt about that. We are displaying that. You must accept us as a nuclear nation. That is not negotiable. And yet on the next day, it's, we can be warm and cuddly by walking in under a unification flag into the opening ceremony. We are willing to do this. This is the second half, but make no doubt about the first half. And then I think one of the results of it could be, or what Pyongyang would want, is if, as the world watches South Korea accepting North Korea, very positive images there, that then others might say, well, why are we pressuring North Korea if South Korea, who lives next door and within even greater threat than the U.S., if they can accept them, why would other nations have pressure? Why would other nations impose sanctions? Why are the Americans trying to be more Korean than the South Koreans? So I think that might be one of the objectives of this charm offensive. But as we've seen before with North Korea, their charm offensives tend to be more offensive than charming.
Frank, there's been exchanges. Athletes have been crossing the border. North Korean celebrity came to the South and stirred the country. So who has been which has been the successful for South Korea or North Korea?
Well, look, I think that any time you have North-South improvement of relations and dialogue and exchanges, it's good for the Korean people, North and South. So I think what we're seeing with the North-South is that it's got to work to the advantage of the South in a way, which is that they have an opportunity to show the North Korean people and the North Korean athletes the warm hospitality of the South Korean people, and to show the spirit of friendship to the people in the North. I think that works to the advantage of the South, but I think for the North Koreans, they get to play on the world stage, a stage that is often denied them because of international sanctions. So I think that the leadership there probably gets something too.
Bruce, just briefly, this Olympics period, could this develop into something meaningful in reducing the North Korean threat?
We can always be hopeful, but perhaps since I've worked on North Korea for some time, I'm a bit cynical. We've seen the Sydney Olympics, the October 2014 Asian Games that were in Seoul, kind of any number of other either sporting or cultural events that didn't pan out. South Korea has assured the U.S. that the military exercises, the annual ones, are only postponed, not canceled. So I think the two nations will have those military exercises. I assume North Korea will again use those as an excuse for doing nuclear or missile tests, which they were going to do anyway.
We'll have to end this conversation here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, a time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. The photo today is a new North Korean propaganda poster released this week. Bright and colorful posters with government slogans are found across the country. This particular one says, "Let's all accomplish the goals set by the leader's New Year's address." Now, Frank, what is your reaction to this photo?
Well, I teach a seminar at the School of International and Public Affairs at Columbia University, and my students have been looking at propaganda posters from the Cultural Revolution in China. And now I know where the artist has gone. He's left China to go to Pyongyang. These kinds of mass mobilization posters, again, speak to the need of the North Korean state to mobilize the people in support of both the dear leader and the nation.
Bruce?
I would just say I was surprised that this is a new poster. It seemed very similar to many that we've seen over the years. This more focused on the economy, but certainly there are any number of posters of, bayoneting Uncle Sam or putting the U.S. Capitol dome, under attack by a missile. So it seems very similar to those in China and the Soviet Union. So, it's a way of trying to rally the people behind the government's policies. This one happens to be focused on economy, but also it could be the repel the American imperialists.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Bruce, Frank, thank you for coming.
Well,
thank you very much.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from VOA, and I'm Eunjang Cho. Thank you for watching.